This is County Executive Steve Shue. You're listening to the Maryland Crabs Podcast.
Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs Podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Frenay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Frenay.
And it's the Maryland Crabs Political Edition. We are going to get a little bit libertarian today. We have David Lashar, who is my neighbor. We've known each other. We're just talking about that for 13 years. And he's also the Libertarian candidate for Maryland's 3rd Congressional District. So you are ambitious.
I'm motivated, yes. I have quite a race in front of myself, but I'm looking forward to the summer and the fall and getting the message out about libertarianism, about my campaign. So be a good summer and fall.
So you're starting at something that you don't have a luxury that the Democrats and Republicans do, which is that you don't have to explain your party. You don't have to explain what you stand for, because most of the people, especially in Maryland, which is, I think it's the second most Democratic state in the country behind Massachusetts, I believe. But right out the gate, it's all about the issues, which tend to be kind of the same. But you have to establish yourself as a candidate in a party that people aren't that familiar with. So I think we all have, or a lot of us tend to have libertarian leanings, but then you winnow it down and people say, no, and you're like, well, you're not really a libertarian. For example, I'm huge on net neutrality, and that would involve a certain element of regulation. I believe that collusion is never kind of tied into the market. So if you're saying the market will correct itself, so I'd say, well, I'm kind of libertarian, and you would say, no, you're not, because you have these views, which are the antithesis of what libertarian views stand for. So you worked for the Dole campaign probably out of college, right?
1988.
So you started red, and then you went to, what color is libertarian? We got red, blue, and...
Our colors are gray and yellow, and for my campaign, I have chosen the burgundy color that's in the Maryland flag.
Okay, so you can get the jumpsuit made up with all that?
Yes.
All right, so what pushed you over to the Libertarian side from Republican? And do you think that most people come to the Libertarian side from the right? And I don't mean the right, but at least from the Republicans?
I'm actually surprised how many people come from left as well as right. I did come from the Republican side. There was a lot in what you just teed up. I think
that you're going to get used to that.
Okay. I look forward to that.
I blather on.
I think that if what you said at the very outset remained true today, then maybe I wouldn't have embarked on my own journey and jumped into this campaign and joined the Libertarian Party. And what you started out with is, the Republicans and Democrats have an advantage in that people already know who they are. And I think that was true for a very long time, certainly from World War II, post-war politics, and early into this millennium, let's say. But what I think is that I think that what we're experiencing in politics today is that both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are struggling with their identity, with who they are. And I think that both of those parties are riven by faction. And for me, what happened was that as we went through the 2016 presidential cycle in particular, and I was working on Governor Hogan's team, pleased to have that opportunity. I was watching the presidential race, and my candidates, in short, quickly got winnowed out. Mm-hmm. Right, the candidates that spoke to me.
Who were they?
So Kasich in particular.
I liked Kasich. I think I would have voted for Kasich had he gotten the nomination. I liked him.
I think that the country would have been better off if he had prevailed. But like all candidates are flawed, right? And Kasich just couldn't get traction. He just wasn't getting his message across. And
I don't think it was his fault. I just think that again, Trump sucked all the oxygen out of everything, and so did a lot of the other candidates as well. And actually, I was surprised how much I liked Jeb Bush. I was stunned I didn't want to, but I actually liked them.
I wasn't a Jeb Bush fan.
Right.
But he was. I could have been comfortable with him.
I was grading on a curve at that point, though, in all honesty.
Yeah, but it's more than just style. Style reveals who you are, your essence. And what ended up happening very quickly was it was Donald Trump right on the Republican side, and Ted Cruz, right, and it was Ben Carson and
Rubio and what's her name from Hewlett Packard?
Carly.
Fiorina.
Yes. I like Carly's story. I was surprised that she didn't go further. I think maybe, getting her footing, rookie attempt, right? Rubio, I'm okay with. He was, but Trump prevailed. Behind him, the other voices were Cruz and Carson, and that's just not the part of the Republican Party that I came from.
It's Reagan. I didn't leave the Republican Party. The Republican Party left me.
Yeah, and John Kasich is saying that now. I don't know if you.
Oh yeah.
Caught that.
As a matter of fact, I can't remember his name, but at the time that we're recording this, and you'll hear this a couple weeks later, but it was the campaign manager for John McCain just renounced his membership in the Republican Party today. In a dramatic manner, by the way.
More people are doing so. I did it in January.
Right. And it doesn't seem like they're abandoning the Republican Party per se because of what they stand for, but for the fact that they see it has been a takeover, that it's now they call it the Trump Party. I'm not calling it that. They are.
Well, I don't think it's unfair to call it that, right? And basically that's what it is for me. But get past the man, the cad that he is, the cartoon.
Good point.
Get past that. What's he really standing for? He's really standing for a form of collectivism, I feel. Mm-hmm. There's a resentment that's coming from him, that he's playing on. And I just don't share those resentments, and I don't hear anything hopeful coming from that part of the Republican Party anymore. And you said Reagan, right? I came of age, I became a voter in the early '80s, and Reagan Republican, and Jack Kemp. Right. I worked with and for one of Jack Kemp's lieutenants, Vin Weber from Minnesota, and. Said it elsewhere. It was called compassionate conservatism, and it was limited government methods to help all people in the country. Right? That was you can argue about whether those methods would or wouldn't actually help people in the inner city, right? But you couldn't question the motives and the intents that a Jack Kemp had.
Right.
These were pure individuals, and I just don't see them in the Republican Party anymore.
Well, I think if I could pin the blame all on one person, and I will.
Go ahead.
I'm going to call it Newt Gingrich. Blame is a strong word. I will say that if you look at the 1980s with Reagan, and you would say that the relationship he had with Tip O'Neill, for example, where they could work together. I'm not saying it was all lollipops and unicorns, but they did work together, and they got some stuff done. I look at Reagan, and I still, I'm conflicted on him on several reasons, but he was relatively socially liberal when you compare him to other Republicans. For the most part.
Yep.
I think there was a compassion there to an extent. It's at the time it seemed a lot more hard-nosed than when you look back at it. But I think during the Republican Revolution of '94 and the contract with America, which was brilliantly executed, but that's when Newt Gingrich kind of introduced. First of all, it was a religious right, which had been. They had the nose in the tent, thanks to Reagan to an extent, because he needed them. But they really pushed all the way into the tent, I think, into the 90s, and they really executed a takeover of the party and pushed them far to the right. Now, some would argue and say that the left went farther to the left, and maybe it was a reaction. I don't know if I agree with it. But there was that Newt Gingrich of there will be no compromises. It will be our way. We're going to, that there's not going to be working with the other side. And I'm not giving the Democrats a break on that. And I could point to people on their side that contributed as well. But to me, every time I see Newt Gingrich now, he represents, he was a neocon, but he was someone that I think really introduced elements to the party that took over and that pushed people like you out, it would seem to me, not someone who was ever in the party.
I find Newt more interesting and complex than that, but I do agree with that time frame being when the shift occurred. I do agree that
it was a lot longer. It didn't happen all of a sudden. It's been 20 years in the making.
It is, and if
25.
If I'm going to cast blame, my own object of that blame would be the Republican presidential candidates post-Reagan, all of them, and so the Bushes, right?
I kind of like George H.W. I thought he was very underrated. I thought he was competent.
I don't disagree with that.
I don't have a picture of him in my house, but in retrospect, I kind of...
He was a good steward of that which was important in the country, and a good man by all indications, right? My critique of him would be that he didn't realize what was happening in his own party.
I agree.
And he contributed to something that Newt calls the consultancy as an evil in our politics in America. And when Newt says the consultancy, what he means is the permanent political class that has taken deep roots in Washington, D.C. on both sides of the party, right? The people who are just there working on campaigns and polls, and they've made their life in politics. This isn't the way politics was in the halcyon days of the 19th and 18th centuries. Right. But I think what happened is indeed that the religious right, and I don't have any contempt for the people who have deep religious faith.
Right.
It's when they, and this is very libertarian of me, right? It's when they start to take their faith and impose it on others.
That's exactly where I am.
Through government.
Right.
Educate, yes. Educate, advocate. I am all for that, and I think that one of our problems today is that we've gotten too far away from a respect for God and a humility before God. That's a different conversation. But I think the politicization... Easy for you to say.
Not really. We're drinking.
Of their views through government, it was off-putting to a lot of people. And I think that what happened was... It was a genuine concern. It became a brand problem for the Republican Party. People like my wife, my sisters, right? Those positions, even though they wanted to be Republicans, they could do so only by gritting their teeth, or they decided that they had to grit their teeth and vote the other side of the ticket, the opposition.
I can be honest with you. I know that hubbub a few weeks ago with Paul Ryan and the House chaplain, and where he let him go and then he came back in, and there's a part of me going, why the hell do we have a House chaplain? I don't... that kind of annoyed me.
Legacy of past years and generations.
I am not a person of faith. I was for years, but I respect people who do have it, but I think you can have morality outside of that. But like you, I don't want it legislated. I don't want, especially, and I don't want to harp on Trump, which I could do forever, but I don't like, I think the evangelical element in this country have sold their soul, and they don't have any moral authority anymore because they're excusing behavior and they're excusing positions that they wouldn't do to other people. But I don't like the fact that they're gaining so much traction in some legislation, and it scares me.
I think they're contributing to the polarization. I'm reluctant to pass judgment.
I'll judge all day long. That's why I wake up and start judging right away.
My politics are libertarian. My religious leanings are Quaker. It's not about ceremony and pushing your views on others.
You're Paxmore.
It's setting an example, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not like I go to meetings at all regularly, but to be religious, to have that religious feeling within you, I think that that's important. But I think it's just as important not to be imposing your religious views on others through coercive power of government.
Why do you think that people are so sold on a brand of Democrat or Republican? Because the libertarian message, if you sum it up, it's like, do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. I mean, that's a gross oversimplification, but I'm kind of a believer in that. And the Republicans will say we want less government in our lives. That's not true either. It's not.
That's one of the reasons I left the GOP.
And the reason I'm picking on them is because that's a hypocritical stance. And fiscal responsibility, I don't want to hear that either. Because
not from this, so not from the modern Republican Party.
So if you want to say the Democrats are tax and spend, I'm not going to argue with that. But at the same time, when someone says, well, I'm socially liberal and I'm fiscally conservative, I'm like, well, wait a minute, hold on. The conservatives are not that fiscally conservative, that they especially what happened recently. But if you look at the parties, why are people clinging to ideals that they could just as easily, you can get a bit of both of it in the Libertarian Party?
I think it's because the parties, the two-party system and the two parties we had did work for us so very well for so long a time. And I think we all know that we get our political beliefs from our parents, basically, and we, as a starting point, right, in general. So I think it's been momentum. And unless there was some triggering event in the environment, you became, and it happened for me as I kind of described earlier. I in 2016, and then when I thought that perhaps Trump was going to become president and shift from politicking to governing,
right?
Change. He didn't.
Right.
For me, was when I started, it forced me to ask, why am I Republican? In other words, why do I have the political allegiances I do? And should I? And I came to my libertarian decision. And my aha moment, Tim, was something you were just getting to. My aha moment was I had always described myself, as I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal, right? That a lot of people do, right?
Yeah.
And I've been doing that since I think in my 20s, probably. It took me a long time to figure out what the consistency of that message was. And the consistency of that message, there's a philosophy underneath it. There's a viewpoint on a consistent viewpoint on what government should be.
Right.
And that consistent viewpoint is it should be relatively limited. Right? Government should not be invading in our personal decisions, right? No, nor should it be overly intrusive in our economy. That kind of skepticism about that belief in boundaries for government in our personal lives and in our economic lives and public lives, that to me is the core libertarian idea. The phrase that you used earlier is the standard formula that libertarians agree with and affirm. Myself, I had to kind of go beyond that and figure out for myself what it meant. And where I ended up, I didn't want to stay with for me, it wasn't just for these days socially liberal and fiscally conservative because the meanings of liberal and conservative are up for debate today.
Right.
So I landed in I think you already know it. I to describe myself, it's socially tolerant and fiscally responsible. Right. That's the way I think of it. A sense of restraint in government's posture relative to all of us as individuals and families and communities. But here's in libertarians. Not all libertarians would fully agree with me. A lot of them would hardly disagree. My own take on libertarianism is that it is not abolition of government as quickly as possible.
Right.
That's a formulation that you do here and has been long-standing and long respected in the Libertarian Party. I understand. I get where they're coming from, but that sounds like anarchism to me, and anarchism doesn't work.
I talked to someone who was an anarchist and a very, very thoughtful person, and it wasn't what I thought it was, but I couldn't get on board because I just don't see how that works either. It wasn't like the punk anarchy, he was a thoughtful, learned man who was saying, no, this is what it means. And at the end I said, yeah, I hear what you're saying, it makes some sense, but no, I couldn't reconcile it with the things that I think have to get done, like roads, law, order, or not law and order, but order, fires. That there's certain things that I see government having a role in.
I don't think society will be better. I don't think that we will be safer or more free by abolishing government. I have a hard time even starting to get my head around that. But I am firmly committed to the libertarian program, ideas and program and movement of getting a handle on government and making sure it is serving us and not oppressing us and limiting us. That's what libertarianism is to me, and that's why I joined the party.
So how do you differ from the Green Party? If you look at the two parties, like the Green Party, I have trouble getting my head around. I think Jill Stein really disrupted what I thought the Green Party was, and maybe I just didn't give it enough thought. Matter of fact, I had trouble reconciling the differences between Trump supporters, Bernie supporters, and Jill Stein supporters, because I think there was a Venn diagram between the three of them where you had an overlap with all three in certain areas. That's what confused me, is that I couldn't neatly categorize everybody. I understand why Trump voters voted the way they did. I've lived in rural Pennsylvania for long enough that I understand those people and why, out of desperation, they did that. I understand why people voted for Hillary. I understand why people voted for Bernie and then Jill, but then the reasons I heard from the supporters seem to be kind of similar in some areas. So I had trouble wrapping my head around what the Green Party has become.
And it's not an easy one for me to answer. I'm not following or researching the Green Party. I respect it. Here's what my thought is, though. I think maybe the Green Party, relative to the Libertarian Party is about a set of principles and then the application of those principles to specific issues. And then there's debate. I'm what's called a pragmatic libertarian in their spectrum, or their tent of different parts of the party. I think the Green Party is perhaps too narrowly focused on environmental issues. Certainly got to start that way, right? And I think that the total commitment to environmental issues spilled over into some more what I would call radical left kind of politics. And I have a sense, this is a hypothesis, and I'd be happy to be educated that I'm wrong about this. Always looking to learn. But I have a feeling that those people who would maybe be candidates have profiles to make them Green Party. I would think that they're going into the progressive wing of the Democratic Party these days. I would think that they're signing up with Bernie, right? I would think that Elizabeth Warren speaks to them, right? And so that's my speculations, and it's nothing but speculations on the Green Party.
Well, actually, no. I mean, Donna Brazile, I was listening to an interview with her yesterday where she was very frank about they were going to make it much tougher for people like Bernie to run on the Democratic ticket, and her rationale. And I see her as a detriment to the Democratic Party. The whole super candidate, the super delegate concept is something to me that's an aberration. But they said that they want true Democrats running. They don't want people who are not plugged into the Democratic core values or their message. And I think the reason Bernie did that is, you look at Ross Perot and Ralph Nader, is that taught both sides a very particular lesson about third-party candidates and how damaging they can be. So I think the only thing the two parties can agree upon is they want it to be as hard as possible for a third-party candidate to run. And they've made it that difficult.
They have. We should be proud of ourselves in Maryland, and I don't know how it came about. But despite being a very blue state, we have very good ballot access. That's the Libertarian Party and the Green Party are the two minor parties that are recognized and part of established politics here. It's fantastic. More voices in politics. Our state is not typical, and being in the Libertarian Party, I see a lot of the emails and messages about other states where it's very difficult to get candidates, the party on the ballot and individual candidates on the ballot. They have to go to the mall and get signatures and raise money, and it's not good for democracy.
Someone posted a picture the other day. It was Maryland in the 70s, and it was a tray at McDonald's, and on there was a the liner, the tray liner.
Yeah.
It was a voter registration. You could go to McDonald's, get your fries and drink, and then register to vote right there.
I am for democracy should be loud and messy. We should have good debates, but civil debates. We should have debates, right? I think that...
Which we don't anymore. It's become... And I blame cable news for that completely, because it's just people in little boxes yelling at each other, and no one concedes points. I mean, Meet the Press you can. Like George Will. I agree with very little of what George Will says, but he's very thoughtful about what he says and eloquent that it makes me think. It makes me challenge my beliefs. But we don't have that anymore.
I agree. I try to watch Morning Joe in the mornings, and it's hard because it's more preaching and virtue signaling. It's not. There's not enough. Well, why? Why does this other person? Why does the other side think that? Isn't there? I mean, they're not bad people in general. Very rarely. So. Why do my fellow citizens, people who share my community, why do they believe that, and trying to dig into it and find the legitimacy? Because there's always usually something to talk about, but we're not doing that anymore.
I've talked about this before. This was an experiment they did about 6 or 7 years ago at, I think it was University of Wisconsin or somewhere up there. And what the experiment was that they had people who self-identified as liberal or conservative. And they said, we're going to discuss climate change, and you're going to argue your position. And they said, since you are conservative, we've provided you with the information that will help bolster your point. And for someone who's liberal, they said, we've given you information that will bolster your point. So they would give the person the book to familiarize themselves alone for about 20 minutes to find the salient points and everything in this book. And then they said, can you please close the book, and we're going to bring in your debate partner. When they closed the book, it had an adhesive on it that then would stick. So when you opened it up, there were facts that did not support your position 100%. So that you were arguing with using information that did not support your point. What they found was, left or right, the people doubled down in their arguments each time. That even though they saw that they were wrong and they had information that disproved what they were saying, they still argued their point. And the point of that was just that when you buy into an ideology, the facts don't matter. It's the position.
Well, this gets back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago. It's not just ideology; it's a religiosity about politics.
It's your identity. It's identity of politics.
Well, it's identity, and it comes. It becomes opening the hymnal and singing the songs without comprehending any of the words, just because it's the ritual.
That's a great analogy.
And there's too much of that right now. You mentioned and. I haven't been following politics. I was in my professional career until getting the opportunity to serve in the Hogan administration recently. And so some of the names in national politics, a lot of the names in national politics, I'm still getting a handle on. So it's Donna Brazile, right? Mm-hmm. Is that okay? And I find it, Republican or Democratic or any party, I find it offensive that a small cadre in the national capital, right, would have the presumption and the power to be making these decisions, using superdelegates and other devices at their disposal. It's wrong.
And that's how I felt about, if you look at the Republicans and Democrats, where, for national level, local level, is that you have a small group of people who are making decisions because they don't want the electorate to make the wrong decision, which to me is just so insulting on every level. And I didn't think that Bernie was going to do nearly as well as he did. I didn't think he stood a chance. Same for Trump. But the difference was that when Bernie got close, much closer than he really should have, which will tell you something about the candidate that they had, well, then they had to correct it, and with a superdelegate. And, they were telling people, the Bernie bros or whatever, get over it. I'm like, but wait a minute, it was stolen from him. That's not a fair process, that you're giving this. That's my problem with religion, too, by the way. You have a small group of people who have the truth, and they're going to disseminate it to the people underneath it.
But it is overtly faith-based in religion.
Right.
They're saying...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, faith. Right.
Right. They're saying... I'm not pointing to any facts for my belief in God, right?
Just prove me.
But politics is different and should be different. On this question, though, of elites within the established parties, really having little agenda except keeping the already elected officials elected, right? I was just in Baltimore today, and it was just a handful of candidates, Republican, Democratic, me, Libertarian, and the conversation was about how the challengers within the Democratic and Republican parties for federal seats, in other words, House of Representatives and U.S. Senate, how they faced impossible challenges in even getting a conversation or debate with the incumbent.
Right.
That's not right.
They're frozen out.
They're frozen out by their parties, by the media. The media is complicit.
I don't think, but I will give the media a pass in this. I think it's because it's laziness on their part, where they are being told by the leadership, these are our candidates, these are the ones. So I don't think they dig deeper than that, saying, hey, we have a candidate here who's interested.
Isn't their role?
No, I agree with you.
Do that digging?
No, I agree with you. So I don't think it's by design. I think it's just laziness, and that's where I would fault them. I think they do have a responsibility to do that.
I do too, and I've heard it from other candidates. There is, and this is just wrong. There is a practice that members of the established media they'll be honest. They're being honest with you when they talk to you as a challenger candidate. They will say, well, until you raise X dollars for your treasury, we can't consider you a viable candidate, so I can't spend my time interviewing you.
Right.
And my editors and publishers can't take their precious space and give it to you, right? That's not right.
And it's funny. That is the first place they go, is the campaign reporting sites to say who's a player or not. And this is so sloppy because it was a podcast I was listening to the other day, and I'm trying to remember who it was, where they ran as a candidate just to see what it was like. And they said that I got in there to meet with the Central Committee, and we sat down, and they didn't ask me my position. They didn't ask me. They said, how much can you raise this much money? And they said yes, and they said, welcome aboard. That was the only, and they said, then they walked out. He goes, that was the only question they asked me. DNC
and RNC, that's what they ask. That's their first question, and it might be the only one. We've got to get past that. The incumbent, Maryland 3rd, I'm running against Representative John Sarbanes, and I don't know his latest numbers. It doesn't guide what I'm doing, but I think he had 1.2 million.
Wow.
It might be more than that. It might be less than that, but let's just call it 1.2 for right now. I have, the report, FEC reports will come out in July. I have a 50th or a 60th of that right now.
Wow.
John Sarbanes might be a better candidate than I am. That's a matter of opinion, and we'll be debating that and talking about that. That's what the election is about over the coming months. But 50 times better? 60 times better? No. And the barriers that money creates for me in instigating the right, getting conversations and debates, it is formidable. Hopefully not insuperable, but it's a big advantage for the incumbents.
I tell you what, why don't we take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk specifically about the 3rd District and about the race and about John Sarbanes, and we'll get into what you're going to do once you're elected.
Okay.
When you're a community bank, you help your community however you can. Like being there for local business people, backing them up when they start up, advising them when they ask, standing by them so they can grow. Helping local businesses is one of the most important things we do at Severn Bank. I'm Alan Hyatt, chairman of the bank, but I'm also a proud supporter of businesses in Anne Arundel County. You know we never forget that here at the bank, we're a local business too. We face the same challenges and opportunities as any business, and we know how fortunate we are to have customers who stand beside us. That's why we stand beside you. If you have a business or you want to start a business, talk with us, because we're banking on you. Severn Bank, here with you.
Online at severnbank.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender. Severn Bank is a trade name used by Severn Savings Bank.
Do you know what your teens are doing this summer? Don't be afraid to ask. The most recent Maryland Safe and Supportive School Survey shows 3/4 of Annapolis high school students say it was fairly or very easy for students in their grade to get alcohol. Underage and binge drinking is very real in Annapolis. If you give them access to alcohol, you're not cool, but you are liable for the outcome. Create a safe environment for your teens and their friends this summer. If they need to talk, listen. If you need to talk, we'll listen. We're here for you and your children. We're ASAP, Annapolis Substance Abuse Prevention. ASAP facilitates healthy community change, prevents and reduces binge drinking, underage drinking, and alcohol-related auto crashes among youth and young adults through locally led collaborations and evidence-based prevention strategies. Visit us at preventsubstanceabuse.org. This message is supported by SAMHSA and the Maryland Behavioral Health Administration.
And we're back with David Lashar, who is a Libertarian candidate for the 3rd Congressional District of Maryland, which is, we just had a Supreme Court ruling that got kicked down the hall. Kicked down the road. It was, I think, Maryland and Texas. We had cases in front of the Supreme Court about gerrymandering based on political affiliation. Mm-hmm. So I think the argument that that these gerrymandered districts have, saying, well, you can't gerrymander according to race or ethnicity, but if you want to gerrymander according to political affiliation, then that's fine. And the Supreme Court was supposed to address that, and they didn't. So I guess that there's probably some judicial watch analysts who are freaking out at what I just said because it's so wrong. But the 3rd District of Maryland is held up as maybe the most gerrymandered district in the entire country. It's they call it the pterodactyl district.
Yes, I think it was a federal district judge who described the district as a splayed pterodactyl lying across the center of the state.
It stretches from...
So it's amazing. It's been hard for me to get my head around it, but
there's little nooks and crannies in there. And my argument was, and this is where I would argue with my friends who are hardcore Democrats, saying, but how are you represented by that?
Well, you're not.
Yeah.
Here's so the gerrymandering. I knew intellectually what it was, of course, but what I only came to realize as I started to think about why I had such disappointment with the political choices that we had in 2016, I started, like many people, looking at gerrymandering and what it really is, and it's evil. What it is modern day Jim Crow. It is a policy that by design, by intent, disenfranchises very large swaths of the electorate. Mm-hmm. 30-40% of the people are just rendered politically impotent through gerrymandering. And I can't think of anything more inimical to democracy. Making 30 and 40% of the voters in a district irrelevant. No wonder people check out, right? No wonder that people become cynical. What should be happening is that districts should be reasonably compact. They should be competitive. They should drawn so that they accord with natural community boundaries and natural physical boundaries. Right?
Because the point being is that I think what you're saying, and what I agree with, is that the districts are not necessarily in place because of elections, that they're for the purpose of elections, which they are.
They're not there for the people. They're there for the
representation.
They're there for the incumbents.
Right. So for representation, so if you have the 3rd district that stretches from parts of Montgomery County through Howard County to Anne Arundel, down into southern Anne Arundel, where it gets rural and it gets, you have farmland. How are all these people? You have urban people, you have Hispanic people, you have farmers, but how can you represent? There's no natural.
No natural sense of community in a group like that, right? And by the way, so it doesn't stretch too far down into Anne Arundel County. That would be the Maryland 4th, I believe. Right. But the district does stretch through the Inner Harbor, over around where the tunnels come up, right? 895 and 95, and then up to Parkville and Towson, all the way out almost to Well, to the Caves Valley area, well out 795, basically. It's a crazy district.
I've never even heard of that.
Well, and so how do I, $1.2 million, I actually, if my challenge with the incumbent has $1.2 million, I don't like it. But I understand that incumbents are always going to have advantages.
Sure.
They are. That's let's not be naive. I'm certainly not. But I can't go out and knock on doors. I can't. In that district. I can't. True story. I don't know if it was the last election or the election before that, but I was talking to somebody in the Libertarian Party who lives in Severna Park, the southern, more towards 50, right? And they are not in the Maryland 3rd, but an election or two ago, John Sarbanes came knocking on their door, and this friend of mine said, well, Mr. Sarbanes, great to hear from you, and glad that you're doing well, but did you know that this isn't the Maryland 3rd? That's how badly contorted the district is. Not even the representative knows where the boundaries are.
When you look at it on a large map, and you'll see it, and someone will joke about the pterodactyl district, but when you take a few minutes just to actually look at it and follow the contours, you're like, this is crazy. There are patches of it that are, because it has to be contiguous, but there are patches that are connected by the thinnest of red lines, one road that all of a sudden explodes into this large, blue sort of area that's incredible. It is staggering.
It is. It was by design. To his credit, Martin O'Malley he was under oath. Doesn't cause everybody to tell the truth being under oath, but it seems to have in his case. So tip of the hat. He's been very forthcoming about the shenanigans. It was more than shenanigans. The conspiracy to draw the districts back in 2011 after the 2010 census. And all the members of Congress, Mr. Sarbanes and others, they were complicit in it. They were fighting for this block and that block, and we need to get away from that. There will always be some shenanigans. That's politics. But when it's at the point that it is these days, and by the way, why has it suddenly gotten so potent as a doleful political influence across the nation, not just the Maryland 3rd, across the nation? It's really because of computers. You know that, right? I mean, you couldn't draw maps in the past like you can do today. So of course there are data sets with every single voter and how they voted, and then there's computers easily render maps and models of, well, if I draw here and draw there, here's what the likely outcomes would be. It's really the rise of computer modeling over the last 10, 15 years that has gotten us to where we are today and has made gerrymandering much, much worse than it ever was in the past, and that's why we need to do something about it.
Now, Pennsylvania, they redrew their districts. That was a Pennsylvania Supreme Court ordered them to do it, and I'm not sure the particulars. I don't know if it was temporary, but they did redraw their maps, and when you look at it, I don't know if it makes sense as a homogeneous area, but it doesn't look crazy when you look at the map. It looks reasonable at a first glance. The
Pennsylvania Supreme Court should not have assumed those powers and responsibilities.
All right, so I have a friend of mine who's got a podcast.
They did the right. I mean, it's good. The outcome is good, but the method of getting there was wrong.
So I have a friend of mine who is a Republican. He actually has a show and a podcast. He's Latour Live up in Pennsylvania. So he was I think he was the spokesman for Tom Ridge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I follow him on Twitter. It was interesting because I was watching that through his eyes, as he would tweet the articles, and he's Republican, but he's center, so he's the one who's kind of lamenting his party being hijacked.
Yep.
But his views, I think, were kind of the same as yours. Maybe is that they had to be redrawn, but this was not the way to do it.
There's only one. The Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court is they can't get involved in the politics, and we really do need an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Justice John Paul Stevens put forward a proposal that looks certainly fine as a starting point. I didn't think it spoke enough to competition within the districts being a key goal or objective, but that's quibbling, right? compactness is and neutrality are the words that jurists in the gerrymandering debate speak to. There are good answers, and we need to abolish gerrymandering. I don't want to get all partisan. It's just not in my nature. But I will say, the Democratic Party did go far overboard in Maryland, just as the Republican Party did in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and elsewhere. A pox on both their houses, right?
We talked about excusing bad behavior with the bad behavior of others.
Yeah, a pox on both, right? Shame on both. But if that method, that trick is available to them, politics is about power. It's a sordid business.
Well, it'd be foolish not to do it.
They can't help themselves. They can't not yield to the temptations. So what's the only answer?
So
remove the temptation.
A few years ago, not that long ago, maybe about 3 years ago, Martin O'Malley did a AMA on Reddit and Ask Me Anything. So for those of you who are not familiar, Reddit.com, which is
I was stuck in American Medical Association. Sorry.
But if you go to Reddit.com, it's like the 5th most popular website in the country, and it's a rabbit hole. But it's great because they do these AMAs that anybody can get on there saying, I am a speech pathologist. Ask me anything. I am candidate for the Third Congressional District. Ask me anything. And then so people ask you questions live. And it can be very curated, or it can be as wild as you want it to be. So he did one a few years ago, and he actually answered 2 of my questions, and everyone could see. And the first question I asked was, what happened to all the money from the gambling that was supposed to go to schools?
Good question.
Well, I knew. Everyone knows that it's a shell game, but I said that during the time.
Yes, it is.
But the second question I asked, saying, when are we going to fix the gerrymandering? As a resident of 3rd District who feels that I'm not being represented adequately,
right.
When we do something about gerrymandering, he goes, well, we are going to fix that as soon as everyone else does, which is
an invasion. It's
never happening.
Well, it's a patronizing answer, actually, and it's an insulting answer. We can talk about money in politics and campaign finance reform, and I am for it. But I think that conversation is akin to how shall we rearrange the deck chairs on the chairs on the deck of the Titanic.
But it's also an arms race, right? Because you can say, okay, I'm not going to accept bundled donations or anything, but your opponent is. And so,
how can you say no? Right? It's like it's political suicide.
From what I understand, and I've talked to people. I've talked to Congress folks like offline or in Congress where they said that they hate having to go walk across the street and spend 6 hours a day on the phone banks, raising money. But they have to because they got to make their quotas for the party. The companies and the special interests, they don't like having to pay to have legislation put forward. The only one that this benefits is a lobbyist. But that's the system that's so entrenched. I don't see how you untie this Gordian knot.
I'm not sure either with the money. Transparency and sunshine is part of it, right? There's a Senate candidate on the Democratic side who is very proud to be championing campaign finance reform, tax credits for the little guy, right? Well, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't. I consider the campaign finance reform to be fiddling at the edges, right? I don't think it gets to the fundamental problems we have about lack of competition in our politics. But to get back to that proposal and just the patronizing, right, and the lack of thought that goes into some of the proposals we hear. Well, so the proposal is something like this. I think it's allow everyone to deduct $50 for their campaign donations, and it's being portrayed as something to help the little guy have and I use guy. Guy to me is men and women.
That was a backpedal real quick, huh?
Well, I'm a different generation. Guy to me is everybody. I am sensitive to it. But so the idea is help the little folks who aren't part of the elites, right?
Right.
Well, here's the thing.
Now, are we talking about public financing?
Well, it's a tax credit for campaign donations is what this proposal from one of the candidates.
So if I donated $100, I could only deduct $50.
That's the way I understood
Okay,
it. Yeah.
but all right, but so essentially, if I make a donation, I can deduct.
If you made $50 donation to your favorite Libertarian neighbor's campaign, right?
Smooth.
The idea is that you would be able to deduct that $50. Now think about that okay, I don't have. But here's the thing. If what you're trying to do is help the disempowered, the folks who aren't in the elite, the economically disadvantaged, right? Well, they don't pay taxes, right? 50% of Americans don't pay taxes, right? So how's this going to help? It's not. And that's the kind of proposal that really eats at me. It makes me. It eats at me, not that politicians would come forward with proposals like that. It eats at me that the press, go back to the press, right? That they're not sufficiently well-informed, well-motivated, whatever it is, to see through it as quickly and easily as I did at first glance, right? I mean, that's their job.
Let me run this by you. Yep. I think we discussed this before. Yep. I can't remember. I talked to a lot of people and I drank a lot. So... My hero is Dan Carlin. He's got a great podcast, and anyone who heard me use the term Gordian knot knows that that's an homage to Dan.
I'll have to.
He's amazing. Great thinker.
I will follow up.
This isn't his idea, but this is one that he champions, and he's a big believer in public financed elections for this reason: is that let's say that you, as a candidate A, that you are well connected, you're an incumbent, and you make a few phone calls, and all of a sudden you've got $1.2 million in your coffer, using the public finance fund that is, with the I don't know how it's funded, but your opponent automatically is matched that $1.2 million. You don't have to do anything. If they raise $1.2 million, you're given $1.2 million. What's the incentive for any company to give a candidate money when they know that it's going to be matched on the other side? You're taking the arms out of the arms race.
Where do you draw the line on who's eligible and who's not, what parties and what candidates in which party in the primaries or not in the primaries? There's a lot of details
that you could iron out, but I mean,
I don't know if you.
But think of this: if you're a Libertarian candidate, and let's say because they're
which I am,
coincidentally, you're raising money is going to be difficult in certain places. Like, if you're in I don't know, California or the Midwest or whatever, it's going to be difficult. But all of a sudden you say, I don't have to spend time on raising money or, going to these fundraisers. I can spend time on the issues. Or if you are an elected official, you don't have to spend 6 hours a day in the phone banks that are across the street from Congress because legally they have to be off site. You don't have to spend that time because the money it's all even. Now, again, I understand your concerns. Who gets the money? Who decides? Who, how many, I get all that.
Figuring out how really, what a truly good solution on the money in politics is of much interest. I'm more about creating competition through more voices available, more choices and voices for the voters to hear from and choose from. That's my fundamental priority for bringing about a better politics than we have today with all the polarization and dysfunction. Let's take me, for example, on money. Let's just, right? So my campaign is a shoestring campaign at best. But I don't have any resentment about not having $1.2 million. If I can even get to low into the hundreds to $200,000 for my campaign, in the modern world, that's enough for a good candidate, is my belief. And give me a second to why do I say that? In the modern world, as bad as poor, irresponsible stewards of their platforms, Facebook and even Google have been, and that's a longer conversation. Those platforms do allow a candidate like me, right, to start to get his voice, in my case, out, right? And look what we're doing here around your kitchen table. This wasn't possible 20 years ago.
No.
Right? Maybe not 10 years ago, right?
Right.
We're getting both of our voices out, right? And you get you are you are a vehicle for getting a channel, for getting lots of voices.
And you're taking
out
the
into
gatekeepers out of the equation.
Right. Well, you're a gatekeeper of a sort, but you're a small g gatekeeper.
Not necessarily, yeah. But I mean, if you wanted to, you could have your own podcast and do that. So that's why I always say this is the best time ever to start your own business.
It is.
Because you have your own tools that can compete with the big guys.
Here's what worries me. Look, I completely agree. Mm-hmm. And it gets to our rights of free speech and free assembly, and I want to use the metaphor of the town square.
Right.
Okay. It is. We all need for as many voices to get into the town square and have their say. Right. That's fundamental to the health of a democracy. Let everybody be heard, and no matter how foolish they are. No inciting violence. There's obvious lines, right? But here's what is most ominous to me as a small. It's not the money. I'll tell you what's most ominous to me as a small candidate. Do it yourself campaign. I've got enough technology savvy that I can use the tools that are available, and I don't have to give money to consultants or other people to help me with that.
Which is a cottage industry,
right? And so I get some cost savings there, but. What do I worry about for my campaign? And you agree with me, disagree with me, but let's debate. That's what's important to me. Having the conversations, listening to each other, reflecting on what each side said later, maybe changing our positions. What worries somebody like me, a small campaign, is access to the town square when the de facto town square is the Facebook platform,
right?
Or it's Google in its many forms, YouTube, and et cetera.
Right.
Facebook in its many forms, Instagram. Those two entities have enormous power that Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong would only envy, right?
They are the king gatekeepers.
They are the king gatekeepers, and they are... in my estimation, great potential threats. They are ominous actors within our realm of free politics, of free and open politics. And Mark Zuckerberg got before Congress. Spring, winter, spring.
I watched all of it.
Well, and one. I didn't think it was a very good performance, but he said, He said, we want to be a platform. We are a platform for all ideas. Well, he says that, but they're not, right? And all ideas can't mean those inciting violence. And in my estimation, it can't be those that are promoting the sex trade, right? Exploitation, right? They can't be that. But pure political views, you pretty much have to be open to everything, because as soon as you start shutting down anything, you don't know where to draw the lines, right? And there's an interesting question. There's a PragerU. Do you know PragerU?
I was reading your blog about PragerU.
Okay, and it's an interesting...
And the blog on your website.
I don't want to exaggerate what's at stake with the PragerU restrictions by YouTube. They're in and of themselves the level of nuisance, but what they bode is, I'm going to use the word again, ominous. And
we're talking about the algorithms by which you find this information.
Yeah, and algorithms and humans. On the Facebook side, Mark Zuckerberg's very clear that there are humans involved, and on the YouTube side, it does seem to be algorithms, but they don't seem to be. What triggers the algorithms is not at all clear. And PragerU. Whether you agree with some, all, or none of their positions that they're advocating in their 5-minute videos, it would be very unreasonable for anybody to say that they are an unreasonable voice or even a hateful voice.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with virtually everything Dennis Prager says, but I've watched them, and I think they have a right to be heard. It makes me think about things.
I hear them describe PragerU described as alt-right, but the videos on PragerU are describing why alt-right is absolutely wrong. Right? So PragerU, you agree, disagree, in part or in whole, they are not an unreasonable and they are not a hateful voice.
I don't find them.
They might infuriate you because they are climate change skeptics, right? And that might infuriate
me, yes.
you, right? Yeah. but they shouldn't be shut off from the debate.
No, and I agree with that. And we were talking about that before we went on, is just how, and we talked about this all the time, we're not covering new ground, but how we've all been able to insulate ourselves with these channels of information coming in, which should expose us to new ideas, but it doesn't, because we have cultivated the algorithms of our own media of choice, whether it be Facebook or Instagram, or if you're following channels on YouTube, that you're only getting, or Twitter especially, because you're only getting the information that confirms what you already believe. And even on my Twitter, I force myself to follow people with whom not only I disagree, but infuriate me, because I have to be able to defend my beliefs to myself. That's the Ben Shapiro's of the world. And
and when I was on when I worked on Capitol Hill after working for Bob Dole, I remember very well one of my back in the day when you actually had to pay for your subscriptions to that which you read. Right. Back in those days, right? The old days. I subscribed to New Republic, right?
And I follow them and I read them.
And it's not that I agreed with what I was reading in New Republic, though Fred Barnes, I think, was a writer, and Morton Kondracki. I can't believe I remember the names. But New Republic was definitely left of where I was, right? But I loved reading it.
Right.
It tempered my own ideas, and sometimes it changed my own ideas.
And I mentioned it before, but George Will is someone that I will never pass up a George Will article, because, like I say, I really disagree where he comes out at the end. But he's obviously smarter than I am, which is not hard. But I mean, he's very learned, and he's very articulate, and when I read what he said, it's all very reasonable. So whenever I read anything by him, I just know, just by brand, he's a man who's thought this out. He was just on Real Time with Bill Maher the other night, and it was funny because he's famously... He's
a libertarian now.
Yeah, but he was not easy on the super liberal Democrats that were in that audience. He was not... At first they were applauding. He's like, yeah, not so fast. But because he didn't abandon his core values. But he's someone that I could listen to, and I could understand. Someone, Christina Hoff Summer. She wrote the War on Boys, and
don't know it.
She is the War on Who Stole Feminism. I read her books. She's definitely to the right, but she's very thoughtful and very respectful, and I can read her. And there are all those thoughts on the left too. There are those people, but they're few and far between, and they seem to be ignored.
They are, and one of my passions and reasons for undertaking this campaign is my worries about our First, Fifth, and 14th Amendment rights of free speech, free assembly, and due process. And my worries are coming. I was first alerted to it from what I saw happening on my alma mater's college campus up in New Hampshire.
You were at Dartmouth?
Yeah, the suppression of speech and the collectivism. And Tim, I think you know this. I think we've talked about it. I was a Russian studies major who went to the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. So I had a summer in the Soviet Union.
That's so cool.
Yeah, with
at the height of the Cold War.
Well, and the amusing part. So the amusing part is that one of my classmates, 15 classmates, who went and spent a summer at LGU, Leningrad State University, when it was Leningrad State University, was Laura Ingraham.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So she's become
a little bit to the right.
So she was Dartmouth Review editor back then, and much more politicized then and now than am I. But it was. I'm here to tell you, she is a good person, as far as I know, from my personal experience back in college days.
But I think these people, and this is what I'll say is that I feel that when we talk about the cable news, that it is a business. So if you look at Keith Olbermann, you look at Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly.
It should be a business.
But no, what I mean is that they are brands. They are that.
Right.
So I wonder who's a true believer. I mean, I think that certainly Keith Olbermann was a true believer, and I'm not saying that in a good way.
It's okay to have a brand. In fact, it's probably necessary to have a brand.
Yeah, but when your brand is based on division,
that's exactly where I was going. That's the problem. And where the George Will brand is thoughtfulness. Right. Charles Krauthammer just passed away.
Yeah. Again, I disagreed with him on everything, but he was a gentleman.
And thoughtful.
He absolutely. And he hasn't passed away yet. But I don't know. This is a couple weeks.
Right. So, there was the announcement of his seemingly terminal.
Yeah, but I disagree with almost everything. But I appreciated the thought he put into his positions. And obviously he's smarter than I am, but I just appreciate that it wasn't just hype. It wasn't that outrage monitoring that, including myself, we all do, that hypocrisy monitoring that we all do, saying, oh, you're mad about this. What about when your guy did that? And I do that too, which is just a horrible habit because, again, you're excusing bad behavior of your side with the bad behavior of the others.
Yeah. And so, look, PragerU should not be suppressed. They need to be part of the public debate for public decisions to be well informed. George Will, maybe listeners don't agree, but we're both, you may not agree with his politics, but very reasonable and thoughtful gentleman. He's being banned on college campuses. I'm not saying he can't go because the reaction is. And
I can't defend the college. That's the side of the left that drives me nuts. Is that, and I will say it's not all colleges, and it's very few of them.
It is at my alma. So I became attuned to it. Right. Yeah, I became attuned to it as being
your Harvard,
an alumnus
your Princeton,
of Dartmouth.
Right.
I saw it early, and I saw it in virulent form. And being a Soviet studies, having been to the Soviet, it was a warning sign to me. Very, very scary to see what's happening there because, of course, I studied Lenin and read, the words and the methods and the hatefulness and the hatefulness that comes across, the self-righteousness that's really hatredness, that's the way to say it. Very similar it's eerily similar and scary in how similar it is to what was happening in the Bolshevik Revolution in the years leading up to it, and as they moved into the Stalin years, it's a belief that it's the problem and the evil of believing that your ends, your goals, your objectives are so important and so righteous that whatever methods you need to adopt to pursue those ends, those methods are justified. And I see that on the college campuses, and it's frightening. I think we need to be attuned to it. And I would like to see a recommitment to free speech, free assembly, and due process on the campuses.
And you want to find out more, and actually David has this all on your website. I've crawled over your website the last couple of days.
Thank you.
So that's Lashar 2018. That's LASHAR 2018.us. So on there you have your blogs, you have your videos, you have more explanations as to your positions and as to what the Libertarian Party stands for.
Yep.
Anywhere else they should find you? I'm sure you have newsletters that you can sign up for.
There's a campaign page on Facebook, of course, Lashar for Congress. I'm sure it's easy to find.
Excellent.
Yes.
All right, Dave, we're going to have you come as the election gets closer and everyone gets down to the issues. We want to have you on board once again to kind of talk about the specific issues and how you want to tackle them. But hey, this has been great. This is as long as we ever hung out as neighbors in 13 years.
We'll do it again soon, I hope.
Well, you brought beer, so it's great. So, Dave, good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them in all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.